Today's daf we're going to be learning is Moed Katan Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Miriam Adler in honor of Rabbanit, Michelle, and Hadran. Today's daf is also sponsored by Rochelle Sobel in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Solomon Sol Sobel, Shalom ben Harav Dov Chaya, on the occasion of his fourth yurtzeit. Sol was a lifelong learner who loved studying daf Yomi, medicine, and anything else that interested his children and grandchildren. We miss you every day. Your wisdom, your kindness, and your gentle guidance. Yehi zichro baruch. And today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family for Refuah Shlema for Rachel, Ophira, Bat Nechama Leah Esther, Emma's daughter. Emma, your daughter Rachel is in our thoughts and prayers, and we dedicate today's learning to her full and speedy recovery with lots of love from your Hadran Zoom family. Okay, we're going to start now at the very top of our daf. So what we saw in the Mishnah yesterday and then in the Breita, we were talking about trapping moles and mice, and we said that if it's, right, moles and mice, according to Tanakama, from a stei ilan, an orchard, or from a stei lavan, a field of grains, in the normal manner. You don't have to do any change, not in the Moed and not in Shemitah, okay, for both Chol Moed and Shemitah. But the rabbis say, no, mistei ilan kedarko, but mistei lavan, they say in a wheat field, you don't really have to worry about it. It's not such a danger, and therefore you can only do it, you can do it, but shalokodarko, not in the normal manner. Then we saw, I'm just kind of giving you an intro to the first part of today's daf because we're going to deal with all these issues. Mikarin et hapirtza b'moed. You can fix a breach in a wall, but in a way that's called mikarin, okay, from the language of mikri, like happenstance, okay? So we're going to have to see what exactly that means. We'll get to that. And b'shvi'it boneh kedarko. In the Shemitah year, though, you can fix your wall, your breach in your wall in a normal manner, which seems kind of obvious. Of course, I mean, whoever said building a wall would be a problem in the Shemitah year, but we'll get to that later. Then we went into this, what is he shoot? And then we brought another Breita, which basically said that you can do it kedarko, as we said. You can be machrivim chorei nemalim. That's where we ended off with. You can destroy antholes by bringing dirt from over the river, right? We said as long as there's no connection between the river and the mans can't get there. And now we're just going to finish that in the next four words from the top of Zion. Ad kama, ad parsa. How far, though? If the two banks of the river are within a parsa of each other, a parasang, which we've talked about exactly how much that is. I can get into the details right now, but it's not such a far distance. But as long as they're more distance than one parasang, then we can, there's one more criteria basically, which is not only is there no connection between them, but they have to be somewhat of a distance from each other. Otherwise, it's not, it won't be so far into them to smell that it'll actually choke them to death. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, now going back to the Mishnah, this is why I read it before, so now you know where we're up to. Rabbi Yehuda disagreed with Tanakama and said, Misteh ha'ilan kedarko, in an orchard, you could do it in a normal way, but Misteh lavan shelo kedarko. But in a wheat field, a grain field, it can't be done in its normal manner because it's not such a danger. Basically thinks that if you're in a stei ilan, not such a concern. So now the question is, what is kedarko? What is shalokodarko? So the pictures will be helpful in seeing this. Tanu Rabbanan ketzad kedarko chofer guma v'toleh b'mitzuda. You dig a ditch and you put a trap in there. Okay, you put a trap under the ground. That's how you would trap it in a normal way. That's what's allowed to do in an orchard, but not according to Rabbi Yehuda in a wheat field. Ketzad shalokodarko. What is shalokodarko? Now here again, we get into a situation where there's many differences of opinion about what exactly this is. No, it's shipud. Okay, you stick, this is pretty, everyone agrees. You stick a shipud, like what's the word for shipud? A skewer in the ground. Now, what exactly this does, we don't really know yet. But makeh kordom, and then you hit it with an axe type thing. Now, what exactly miradeh is? So Rashi here says miradeh, but remember the Rashi here is not the regular Rashi. There's what's called Rashi Michtav-Yad. Actually, I confused the language the other day when I said something about Rashi Michtav-Yad. Rashi Michtav-Yad is the manuscript that we have the actual Rashi from. Okay, that's the Rashi Michtav-Yad as opposed to the Rashi here. That's the one that people believe is the actual Rashi. There he has, instead of miradeh, midadeh. Midadeh is to shake up. Okay, so now the idea here, again, there's different opinions, but either one could read it as you put the shipud in the ground, it shakes up the ground. What happens? The mole is living under the ground, or the mice. They come out, and then makeh b'kardom, you smash it. Okay, which means you're not actually trapping it. right? You're actually just killing it directly. So that's one way to read it. The problem is we're kind of talking about traps. So some people try to explain it in such a way that, maybe you bang on the shipud with a kardom and then it causes the ground to move and then, it comes out. The question is, how do you exactly trap it? It's not so clear. So I'll just leave it at that we don't exactly know. Hopefully you won't be in a situation and need to know exactly how to do this. Okay, next. Tanya. Many people say that it's actually Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, and now how it says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Omer, כשאמרו משדה לבן שלא כדרכו, לא אמרו, אלא בשדה לבן הסמוכה לעיר. When we talked about this שדה לבן, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're not allowed to trap it in its normal way. So we're only talking about a field that is near the city, okay? Because really then the danger is just the field, and the field's not such a danger, and the city's not such a danger, okay? They're running around the city. We don't really care so much. It's not going to cause damage. Let's put it that way. It's not what we call our classic category of davar ha'aved. But v'ste lavan hasmuchat l'ste ilan afilu kedarko. If you have a field that's a field of grains and it's right next to an orchard, well, then we're going to permit it, even in a normal way. Why? Obviously, Shema Yitzeh Mistea Lavan v'yachrivu et ha'ilanot, right? They might, as these creatures get around, and therefore, just like the mice get around, right? And how far can they get? Same thing here. It can get into the orchard. So therefore, even if it's in your field, your wheat field, which is not such a danger that they're going to destroy your field, but there's a danger they'll get to your orchard, and therefore you're allowed to trap them. Now we're getting to the wall. Okay, I'll stop here for just a brief minute and give some background to something we've been talking about, which is the whole idea of Isur Melacha and Chol HaMoed in Gefet this week, which I highly recommend listening to. Rabbanit El Shimoni went up last night. Rabbanit El Shimoni goes into this idea about Isur Melacha. I mentioned this in brief, but it's a really big issue, and it came up on Daf Bet really, and it comes up more on Daf Yud Aleph. And it comes up in Masechet Chagiga, which was the next Masechet we're going to learn, which is the whole nature of Isur Melacha and Chol HaMoed. Is it deoraita? And there's this comment in the Gemara, we'll see later, that it was given to the rabbis to determine where it applies and where it doesn't. And that's why this whole Masechet, it's very fluid, as you see, right? Where all the time we're trying to figure out, is this within what's forbidden? Is this not within what's forbidden? So is it a Torah law that it's actually forbidden to work on the holiday? And the rabbis were just given the opportunity, though, to define this Torah law, which is a very unique thing, which is why some people disagree and say, no. If the rabbis were given the ability to determine, well, then the whole thing must have been rabbinic. And there's a big machloket about whether the whole nature of the prohibition to work on Chol HaMoed is by Torah origin or rabbinic origin, which, as we know, that's very important to know which one it is. And we don't have an answer, actually, but there are different opinions about this. And that's the shiur of Gefet this week. So I highly recommend listening because it gives very good background to everything that we're learning. So now we have a whole bunch of different content that's background to things that we're doing. It's very useful. Okay, so now mekarin et hapirtza b'moed. So now you're allowed to fill in your hole in your wall in a bit of a different manner. Mikarin, as I said, it's from the language of mikri, akrai, which is sort of things happening without really, not permanent. So ketzad mikarin, how do you do this? Rav Yosef Amar behutza v'dafna. Okay, it's taking certain shrubs and bushes and kind of sticking that in the hole in the wall. Okay, just to kind of block it off. B'manita tan and a braita, they give a different answer. Sar bitzrol, you put rocks there. Ve'eno tach b'ti, you pile rocks on top without actually cementing them together. So it's a much more serious thing, a fix, than the other, but it's also not super sturdy. It's not very permanent because you're not, normally if you would fix it with rocks, stones, you would cement them into place. Amar Rav Chisda. Okay, from here till the next Mishnah, which is further down on the daf, we're going to only be dealing with Divrei Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda now comes and says, Lo shanu ela kotel hagina. This whole Mishnah where we're talking about mekarin et hapirtza b'moed, and then it says, right, but on Shemitah year, you can do it in its normal way. Well, that's only if it's in a garden. Okay, the walls, what kind of wall are we talking about? There could be a wall of your garden or a wall of your courtyard. Now, normally nowadays, most people, maybe there are people who have this still, if you have a really big plot of land, but normally your wall of your courtyard is really your wall of your garden, because your garden's in your backyard and your backyard is where you have a wall around your house. But imagine that they had a courtyard that was connected to their house And then they had a garden that was separate from that. So he says that must be the way they had things. And their gardens were off to the side and it had its own separate walls, not within the walls of the house. So he comes and says that we're clearly only talking about the wall of a garden, and we're not talking about the wall of a courtyard. Why? Because we'll see right now, okay, a regular wall that broke on your courtyard, right? So now that would be, let's say, around your main property, you're allowed to fix. Why? If it's broken, what will happen? Robbers can get into your house. This was the way they protected from robbers. And you're not going to be very happy on the Moed if you're sitting there worried all the time that robbers are going to come in. So of course, that is allowed to be fixed in a normal manner because we'd say it's tzorech hamoed. But for your garden, it's not the biggest deal. You can just stop it up. You're basically trying to prevent animals from getting in, and you can stop it up in some temporary manner. So now they say, lema misayele. So now we're going to have the same source, and we're going to have two different versions of what happens with that source. The first version is going to say, we're bringing it as a proof for Rav Chisda, and they'll reject that. Then the second version of the sugya was that they brought that same source as a rejection to Rav Chisda, and then they resolved the rejection. Okay, so we're going to have a mirror, call this the mirror image sugya. And then finally, we're going to actually say that we can prove Rav Chisda, okay, because that's going to lead us nowhere because our proof gets rejected and our rejection gets disproved. And then we're going to end up with Rav Ashi saying, I'm going to prove Rav Chisda actually from the words of our Mishnah. And that's where we'll end our sugya till we, before the next Mishnah. So now we have Lema Misayele. Let's suggest that this source, this Tanaitic source proves Rav Chisda. Okay, it's always good when you have a Tanaitic source to prove what you want to say. We're now talking about a wall. If you remember in Tani, we had all these walls that were falling and people were scared to walk near them because they were about to fall. Let's say you have a wall of your house that's leaning over toward the public domain and might fall. Now here, it's dangerous, right? If your wall falls into Rashid Arabim, basically going to hurt people. So obviously you can do something with that because otherwise it's dangerous. So what do we say? So you can knock down the wall and rebuild it because of the danger. So now they say, there you have it. Look, you can build a wall that's not a wall of a garden in a normal manner, right? Here's your wall of your courtyard, obviously, we must be talking about, and it's permitted. To which the Gemara says, you can't prove anything from there. It's a totally different case. There it specifically says, why are you allowed to do this? Which means that if there's no danger, right? In other words, I think they thought, danger there, danger of robbers. But no, it's a very different danger. With the wall falling, there's danger of it hurting someone. That's why we allow it. But we wouldn't allow it if you're just scared of robbers coming into your house. So that source doesn't prove what we wanted to prove. So now they're going to take the conclusion of this and say, well, actually, some people said, Iga Amre, Tashma, they brought this source, and we'll see it's brought as a contradiction. Which seems to imply, right? I didn't translate. That's the exact same source we saw a minute ago. That source seems to imply your wall is about to fall. We let you break it and fix it. For what reason? Just because it's dangerous. But if it wasn't dangerous, it wasn't going to hurt people, well, then we wouldn't allow it. And that would be our case. The wall of your courtyard, it sounds like maybe you can't fix on Chol Moed. To which, right, so Lema Tavitiyufta de Rav Chisda, we should actually suggest this as a difficulty on Rav Chisda. Amar lecha Rav Chisda could answer you in the following way. Notice there was one difference about that case, about what was allowed there. What did they say? You can break your wall and fix it. Here, we just want to fix a breach in the wall. That's not the same thing. So they say, Hatam soteru boneh, hacha boneh v'lo soter. In our case, you can't knock down the wall and rebuild it. So you basically say, there, we're going to allow you even to knock it down and rebuild it. By us, we're going to allow you to fix it in a normal way, like put stones in and cement them into place. But no one's saying you can break it and rebuild it. And that was the inference from that source, that only mipnei sakana you can break and rebuild. In our case, you can just build it up. And then we resolve the difficulty. So hatam nami, they're going to say also here, list of, now they ask a question. Sorry, now we have a side question. Why don't we say by the wall that's about to fall, list or velo livne? If the whole thing is we're worried the wall is going to fall on someone, why don't you just permit it to break the wall and not necessarily permit you to rebuild it? This is a very interesting, insightful into human behavior, which is in Cain. And not only is it an insightful into human behavior, but it's insightful into how the rabbis perceived human behavior and how they use that to determine halachot and to permit things that are normally not. So here they say, in Cain, if we basically tell you, you have a wall that's about to fall, it's very dangerous. It's leaning into Rishut Rabim, it could hurt someone. It's Chol Moed. You're not really supposed to do anything that's Tirchi Yatera, but we're going to allow you to break down that wall. Now, you sitting in your house, you're going to say, okay, well, they'll let me do this on Chol Moed, but what's the problem? They're only allowing me to break it. They're not allowing me to rebuild it. I don't want to end up with, this wall is fine for me. Yeah, it might fall. First of all, it's not going to fall into me. It's going to fall on someone else. And, what the chances are it's going to fall. It'll probably last. I'd rather leave this up. I don't want to break my wall. I want to have a wall for the week. If they're not going to let me rebuild it, then mimne velo satre, right? Velo soter. I might just say, I'm not going to do anything about it. And the rabbis certainly didn't want that because it's a danger, it's a hazard to the public. So in order to encourage you to actually deal with it, they basically say, oh, you can even rebuild it because otherwise they think you're not going to do it at all. And it's a public hazard. So again, you see the flexibility with Isurei Malacha and Chol Moed that we can even allow you, right? Think about it. Doing construction in your house, right? That's serious to start. Breaking down a wall, rebuilding the wall, that's a lot of work, but yet we allow it because of the hazard to the public. Amar Rav Ashi. Now so that was an aside just about that case that we brought in before. But now we're back to our main topic, which is Rav Chisda said the case is only in your chatzer, but not, right? I'm sorry, only in your garden, but that you can only do it in this haphazard manner. But if it's your wall on your courtyard, of course you're allowed to fix it. We tried to bring a proof, didn't work. We tried to reject it, didn't work. Now we're going to bring a proof. Amar Rav Ashi. We can infer it from our Mishnah. Why? Katan, it says at the end of the Mishnah, if your wall breaks in the Shnat Shemitah, you can build it in a normal manner. Well, dehecha, what kind of wall? I wouldn't need to tell you, okay, now is the Shemitah year. Do I need to tell you if you want to do construction in your house in the Shemitah year, you can? There's no connection to Shemitah whatsoever. Shemitah has to do with the land. A courtyard wall has absolutely nothing to do with Shemitah. So there would be no reason for the Mishnah to tell you this is permitted in the Shemitah year. So therefore, it must be Elalav Digina. It's telling you if you want to now build a wall at Shemitah right now, you want to build a wall around your garden, you're allowed to. Now, why do you need to be permitted to do this? It's not working the land, why do we need, it's true, it's not a problem, but why would the Mishnah need to tell us it's not a problem? In other words, they wanted to teach you that you might have thought that this is a way to protect your garden, and therefore maybe it would become under the laws of Shemitah, and maybe you wouldn't be allowed to because it is associated with your garden and things that grow. But comes the Mishnah to teach you, it doesn't matter. This is not working the land. It's not under the rubric of what would be forbidden in the Shemitah year. Okay, that's the easier part of today's stuff. Now we're going to get into the laws of tzaraat. Okay, it's a little bit complicated, but I'm hoping that I've organized it in a way that it'll be much clearer than it seems. The first thing you have to know, and they always talk about the silver linings of Corona. This is one of the silver linings that we're going to have a much better understanding of the leper. Okay, so here goes. A leper. I see a leprous mark on my body. What do I do? Is it a problem right now? Okay, let's try Corona, right? I start coughing. Does that mean I have Corona, right? Let's say I get a test and I test positive for Corona. Does that mean I had Corona? Let's say I did it three days ago. I start coughing, I get sick, and then I test for Corona. When does it consider that I was sick with Corona? Now, we all know that I was sick with Corona 3 days ago, but I know here in Israel, when they talk about the laws of when you get out of quarantine from Corona, they count it from when your test came back positive and not from when you actually started showing symptoms, which is interesting in and of itself, right? It could be that's for legal reasons, right? I don't know what reason, but we're going to talk about the same thing with the Mitzorah. When you have a leprous mark, all laws of leprosy kick in only when you show it to a Kohen. It's incredibly similar, right? Until it's determined that this is a leprous mark, it's as if you have nothing. Now here it's a little bit different from Corona because maybe, again, legally, when you start having symptoms, it's not, I don't know what the laws are, right? Do you need a quarantine or not? You don't yet know what it is. So likewise with leprosy. Now, one could say, maybe this is proof, by the way, and I think that there is a lot of proof here that and even though I'm comparing it to COVID, it's not exactly the same, but it's that maybe it's not a health issue, okay? Because the fact that it's all determined when the Kohen determines and not when you have, like, let's say you push it off for 7 days and you don't go to the Kohen. Are you considered a leper? No, you're not, okay? Question is, you obligated to go to a Kohen, right? What your legal responsibility is. It's a very interesting question. So, and this is really what the sugya is going to be getting at. So basically, until the Kohen determines that you're a leper, you're not a leper, which might be a proof that leprosy is not a disease in the Torah, but a spirit, not a physical disease, but a spiritual disease. And therefore, once the Kohen determines it, that's when it is. So this is you can go with this you can really understand it a lot better when you think about COVID. So now, even more so when we talk about the process, okay, there's the way it's going to work is like this. You see something, you're supposed to go to a Kohen, okay? Again, when you go to a Kohen, we're going to see, can you delay it for certain reasons, etc. Specifically Chol Moed, right? Why would you want to delay it? Because if you're not a leper, right? This is classic for, I was thinking my son is going to a wedding of one of his close friends this week. They had a Shabbat Katan this week, and everyone had to test for COVID before to make sure. And I was thinking to myself, this poor boy, what if he gets COVID on his wedding and can't even go to his wedding, right? So there's this interesting thought about, okay, we're going to see even later, it comes up about a wedding that you can push off going to the Kohen until after your Sheva Brachot are over, because we don't want to ruin your wedding. Like I'm thinking, let's say there was someone who tested positive at that weekend. Is he obligated right now? Legally, he is obligated to go for a COVID test. But what if he just doesn't go for a COVID test, right? What he doesn't know doesn't hurt him. And so this is all questions, right? If you ignore a little bit of the legal of what, well, technically you might have to, but it's a very interesting question about, do we allow you to push off the test if, right, just so that you don't end up in this, you don't ruin your simcha of your wedding, and likewise, your simcha of the holiday. Can you push it off? Okay, and we're going to see more so. Not only can you push it off, but maybe the Kohen is not, maybe you can't even do this because it'll ruin your holiday. Remember what happens, okay, and this is the issue, obviously, okay, I see you writing this, Becky. This is obvious. You're infecting everyone with COVID. I'm not relating to that aspect. That's clear. And I'm certainly not telling people, okay, maybe I wasn't clear here, but certain things that are obvious to me are, I don't always express them. Obviously, this is a hazard and I wouldn't recommend anybody doing that. What I wanted you to do, though, was think in your mind about this. And that's why I think the rabbis don't view leprosy as contagious, because otherwise, right, it's clear that they're not worried. And this is really why I compared it to COVID, is because it's the difference. COVID, the whole concern is you're going to spread it around to people. So yes, you shouldn't avoid doing it. You shouldn't, all of that. But leprosy is not contagious. The reason you're separating is not because you're going to infect somebody else, but you're separating because you have a certain level of impurity on you, and that makes you have to separate. But the impurity only comes when the Kohen determines. So if we can avoid that right now, then we can avoid ruining your simcha of the holiday. So it's a very fascinating topic to think about. Again, I'm going to now go through the process. So you go to a Kohen, you think you have some leprous mark. The Kohen either says, this is nothing, go home, you're fine. Or the Kohen could say, this doesn't look so great. They can either say, this has all the simanim. I'm not going to get into what all the markers are, but this has all the markings of leprosy. You're a leper, what's called a mitzvah muchlat. And you have to be sent out of 3 camps. That means away from everybody. You're quarantined. And we'll see later that actually the only thing you can do is you can be with your spouse. Okay, that's one thing we're going to see. At least there's a machloket about it. But the sugya we're going to read is more in the direction that, yes, you can be with your spouse there, but nobody else. Then if the Kohen determines, I'm not sure, that you're called a mitzvah muzkar, you have to go quarantine for 7 days. After 7 days, the Kohen checks you again. And then again, they can keep you muzgar for another 7 days. They can say you're fine, or they can say you're a muchlat. Some people think that you would end up often quarantining for 14 days, which makes sense a little bit in the context of something we'll see later in the sugya. But I don't want to get too many details of machlokot between Rishonim because there's a lot of them. But you can end up 14 days muzgal, and then you can become muchlat, or then you can be tahor. And then you basically just go to the mikveh and you're out of it. Once you become a mukhlat, to get out of it, you have to do 7 days of counting. Those days, you're forbidden to be with your spouse. It says so explicitly in the Torah. So then you become, on one hand, you're kind of, and this is important to remember because this is going to affect the way we read the sugya, you're already getting better because you're on your way out. On the other hand, right, you have to get out of being a mukhlat, the Kohen has to also determine that you're done with your leprosy, that it's gone. So then you count 7 days, and then you do this whole tahara process, which we mentioned a bunch of times, with shaving, with birds, with this, that, sacrifices. Not going to get into the details there. But it's obviously a harsher thing than the previous one. Anyway, let's start our Mishnah with all that background, and hopefully Toch Kedei, as we learn, we'll understand better. Rabbi Meir Omer, Ro'in et hanigaim, the word b'tchila, many people remove, so I'm going to remove it here. It's in parentheses in my Gemara. Ro'im et, right, parentheses means we don't read it. Ro'im et hanigaim lahakel, aval lo lahachmir. This is very interesting. This is something we didn't discuss yet. I can go to a Kohen on Chol HaMoed. Okay, we're obviously talking about Chol HaMoed. I go to Chol HaMoed. I go on Chol HaMoed to the Kohen. If the Kohen sees, like I'm worried I have a leprous mark, okay? The Kohen sees, again, we're not sure yet what case they're arguing about, but let's just say right now, we're talking about in the beginning, so we'll see this isn't, but let's say I'm worried I have a leprous mark. I go to the Kohen. The Kohen looks at my mark. Now the Kohen has 2 options. Kohen can either say, right, or 3 really, you're a mukhlat, you're a muzgar. Okay, let's put those all in one category, which is not good for me. Or you're totally fine, it's nothing, right? Like a COVID test, but you come out. This is basically like saying, you can go for a COVID test on Chol HaMoed under the condition that you tell them, only send me my results if it's negative. Okay, now it's a little bit weird to say that, right? And that's what's very strange about this. But you're basically saying the Kohen can come say, now that would mean if I don't get a result that says I'm positive, right? But I don't get a result that says I'm negative, I know that means I'm positive because I said to them, send me the results only if I'm negative. But so does that mean I'm positive, but I haven't yet gotten a positive COVID test? So maybe I'm not positive until the result comes in that says I'm positive. It's that's what he basically says. The Kohen can say, oh, you're good, no problem. But if the Kohen thinks it's a nega, a tzarat, a leprous mark, he's just silent, doesn't say a word. And because he doesn't declare you a leper, you're not a leper. That's what it's basically saying. And Rabbi Meir has no problem with it. So he says, if I can make your life better because you're happier not being a mitzorah, go for it. No problem. You can do that on Chol HaMoed. But the Kohen can't say something negative, and therefore the Kohen just stays silent. He won't put you into a situation where you have to start quarantining and being away from people, etc. Chachamim omrim, the rabbis say, lo lahakel v'lo lahachmir. No, you can't show it to a Kohen at all, not to say you're not a leper and not to say you are a leper. And we're going to see this in a minute, why they say that. So the Gemara brings a braita. The braita is going to have 2 parts. The first part we're going to deal with in the beginning, and then we'll get later to the second part. Tan. So first, it's going to sound exactly like our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer, lo ina tenegeim lahakel v'lo lahachmir. Rabbi Yossi Omer, notice it's not the Chachamim, it's Rabbi Yossi, which basically means that the Chachamim in our Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Omer, lo lahakel v'lo lahachmir. So far, it's exactly the same as our Mishnah, but here comes the difference. It just adds why Rabbi Yossi says this. She'imata niskak lo lahakel, niskak lo af lahachmir. Because there's no such thing as saying, oh, only tell me if my result is negative. If your result is not negative, then your result is basically positive. And we'll see later, he proves this from the Pasuk. It says, litam'o o litaharo. You go to the Kohen to either purify you or declare you impure. Now, or I don't remember the order of the Pasuk, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that you have to hear it's litaharo o litamo, okay? The point is the Kohen has to say one or the other. Once you go to the Kohen can't be silent. You can't tell someone, give me a COVID test and only send me the results if it's negative. There's no such thing. What was the point of doing it? There's no point. So basically, he doesn't believe that there's an option to give only positive, again, good results, I should say, not positive results. There's no option to give only good results, and therefore, or good determination by the Kohen, and therefore you're not allowed to do it at all because potentially you might be messing them up for the holiday. And again, this all goes back to we don't want to ruin your simcha of your holiday, your happiness on the holiday. Now we get to this other line, which we're not going to understand at all now. Hold off. I know it's not fun to read the line and not understand it, but we'll get there shortly. This is the complicated part of today's stuff. I'm a Rebbe. I would hold, okay, it seems to me that we should hold like Rabbi Meir if we're talking about that you're a muzgar after you've been in quarantine for 7 days and you're determining what's your next move, then I would hold like Rabbi Meir. And I would hold like Rabbi Yossi if you're a muchlat. And then the question is, did you finish being a muchlat and you can go to your 7 counting days, or you're going to continue being a muchlat? In that case, I would hold like Rabbi Yossi. And we don't yet really know, which means, again, I won't let you go to the Kohen versus I will let you go to the Kohen. So basically what he's saying is, in simple words, we don't yet know why, I would let you go to a Kohen if you're a muzgar, if you're in that stage after the first 7 days, or maybe even after 14 days, but I won't let you go if you're a muchlat and you want to kind of, your process is either start your 7 counting days or not. We don't know yet why he says this. And not only do we not know why he says it, we're going to have another version that says that Rebbe says the exact opposite. So we're going to have to prove both ways of reading it. That's why I didn't want to get into it now, because we're going to get into it all much in a bit. Amarav, comes Rav and he says the following. He says, if you're, now we're going to all of a sudden say this machloket is not across the board in every situation. If you're pure, meaning you start off at 0, all of a sudden you wake up in the morning, you see a leprous mark. Everyone agrees that you don't show it to a Kohen. Why? Because a Kohen can only make your situation worse, right? In this case, right now, I'm nothing, because remember, until the Kohen determines I'm a leper, I'm not a leper at all. So I see you wanted me to review Muzgar and Mukhlat. I'll do it as I speak now. So if I start with nothing, I can only get worse, because right now I'm good. I'm not a leper, right? So again, think of Corona. Again, it's hard to compare to Corona because you wouldn't say this, but if I come in contact with someone who had Corona, right? Basically, they're saying, don't check on Chol Moed. Again, I'm definitely not recommending you do this, but this is what they're saying. Don't check on Chol Moed, because right now you're nothing, basically. It's saying, let's say we take Corona and we assume there are no rules about someone who was in contact with someone who had Corona. So we'd say, just leave it right now. You don't know, but you don't know won't hurt you. Behezger Rishon, now remember, if the Kohen sees you, what will he say? Either he'll say, for sure, you have all the simanim of a leper, you're a leper. Or he'll say, I don't know, we're going to put you in quarantine for 7 days. That's Hezger. Okay, that's Hezger Rishon. Means you're now quarantined. You're not a leper yet. You're quarantined for 7 days. At the end of those 7 days, we're going to check. At that point, you have 3 potential options that could happen. The Kohen could say, you are now a mukhlat. You definitely have tzarat. You are continuing. I don't know. I'm still not sure. I'm going to leave you quarantined for another 7 days. Or you're pure and you basically go to the mikveh and you're done. So behezger rishon, they say, everyone says that you can actually show it to the Kohen because your situation can't get worse. Now, there's a little bit of a difficulty here. Why can't your situation get worse? You could become a mukhlat, which is much worse. So that's where the Meiri comes in. I mentioned before that most people ended up in Hezger, 2 Hezgers. And it was very rare that you ended up becoming a mukhlat. And maybe that's why, because either you're just going to stay in quarantine or you can get out of it. So it's actually chance, let's say 50-50, you're going to be in a better situation. And the other option is really, it's more one and the same. If you don't go by that, you have to explain it a little bit differently, that maybe mukhlat isn't so much worse, even though it is. I'm going to leave that aside. It's a little bit of a weakness in this answer, but we'll leave that right now. So they don't argue, again, if you're at stage 1, right? Stage 1 is you see something, you don't yet know what it is. There, everyone agrees, don't go to a Kohen on the holiday. If you're already finished your first 7 days of quarantine, then we basically say, go to a Kohen. Everyone agrees, even Rabbi Yossi, because chances are, right, you're either going to stay the same or get better. But what's the machloket then? Behezger sheni. After the 14 days pass, then mar savar bekohen tal yamilta. I tahor, amar le tahor, bi tameh shatik. Now we get back to the real machloket between them. When you're at day number 14, you've been in quarantine for 14 days, and now you have 2 clear paths in front of you instead of 3. Okay, by the way, one of the answers to the difficulty of the last one is that l'tam'o l'taro is only when there's 2 options, and that's when you have to say either or. Since there's 3 options in that one, maybe that's why that one you can actually choose to be silent about one option. That was a creative answer to that one. But anyway, that's an aside. But I want to keep you on track so you don't get too confused here. So after 14 days, again, what's your track? You can either become a mukhlat, which is a full-fledged leper, which you'll then have to wait till it entirely goes away. Then when the Kohen determines you're fully cured, and at that point, you have to leave all the three camps. Okay, the three camps basically means right in the time of the desert, it was the Mishkan area, the Levites area, and then the Yisrael area. And you're basically outside of all of them. And then, and according to what we're going to see later, you can be with your wife, okay, or your spouse. If you're a female, you can be with your husband. And you'll see they all worded in the masculine because that's generally the way the Gemara talks, but it's obviously, assumingly in both directions. And at that point, so either you can become, so again, you're standing at day number 14. Right now, you're only quarantined. You're not like, let's say, corona. You're not necessarily that you have corona, okay? You're not necessarily a leper. You might just get out of it at the end of this. And the Kohen will say, listen, this isn't leprosy. In which case, if this isn't leprosy, then you just go to the mikveh and you're finished. So that's a good one. If they say there is no hezger anymore, right? So it's basically two options because you don't quarantine for more than 14 days. There's no such thing, right? It's interesting. You think about in the beginning, I know in Israel, they made people quarantine for 14 days. So there is a similarity. Never quarantine more than 14 days. So you're either going to be tahor, the tahor track, or the pure, or you're going to go to the tamei track and you're going to become a leper and you're going to be sent out of the three camps. So now we're going to say, this is where the machloket kicks in. Rabbi Meir says, Kohen tell you milta. The Kohen can decide. The Kohen can decide to shut his mouth or to tell you, right? So tahor, he'll tell you, tahor, tamei, shatik. And then, now, I said there's nothing more than quarantine of 14 days, but in this case, you will, because you're basically, right, there's no way of determining you're going to quarantine for more than 14 days. But if you just don't go to the Kohen, or the Kohen doesn't tell you you're a mukhlat, then you just stay in your current situation and it doesn't get any worse. Umar Saval, but Rabbi Yossi says, this is where he comes in and says, litaharo or litamoktiv. It basically says you either have to say tahor or tameh. You can't basically do one and not the other. It's either that or that. You don't have an option to be silent and just not say anything. And that's why he says, don't go to a Kohen on the holiday if this is your situation. Now we're going to get to this complicated part of Rebbe. Amar Mar. So now it's just, we're saying the quote, we're quoting, Amar Mar is a way of saying we're quoting from what we said before in the Braita. Amar Rebbe says, Nirim divrei Rabbi Yossi b'muchlap and divrei Rabbi Meir b'muzkal. V'hatanya ipcha, but wait, isn't there a Braita where it says the exact opposite, that he holds like Rabbi Yossi b'muzgar and he holds like Rabbi Meir b'muchlat? So how are we going to resolve this? Tanaihi ba'aliba de Rebbe. This is a machloket Tanaim according to Rebbe. Meaning there's a debate among the Tanaim what Rebbe said. Now we're going to have to explain this. The Gemara explains it in 10 or 12 simple words, but Rashi explains it much more in depth because the words don't really tell us very much. Mar savar tzavta de alma adifle, umar savar tzavta de ishto adifale. The machloket between the Tanaim about what Rebbe held, one said, a person, this is a fascinating machloket. Let me first start out with explaining that when you go from being a muzgar, a mukhlat, to your 7 counting days, a mukhlat, we said, is allowed to be with one's wife, right? But a muzgar, counting, when you do the 7 days of counting, right? Again, there's 3 stages. There's muzgar to mukhlat that we're going to discuss now, or there's 2 stages we're going to discuss now. One is you're a muzgar and you're waiting to decide, are you going to be determined a leper for sure? Now, what will happen to you at that point? You'll have to leave the camp. That means you'll have to be distanced from people. But if you recall, we said you're allowed to be with your wife. Once you finish those 7 days of mukhlat, if you become a real leper, when you go from mukhlat to counting days, then you're forbidden to be with your wife. Now you're allowed to go back into the machaneh. So you're allowed to be with people, but you can't be with your spouse anymore. So the question is, which is worse for you? Is it worse to go from muzgar to mukhlat, where all of a sudden you have to leave the community? Or is it worse to go from mukhlat to counting days where you won't be able to be with your spouse? So it's a very interesting question. What is more critical? So now, if the Mar Savar, the first Mar Savar is actually the second Braita that says the opposite of what the Braita that we had said, which is, I hold like Rabbi Meir when it comes to a mukhlat. Okay, and I'm going to paraphrase what Rashi says here. I see you're asking, what if someone's single? It really doesn't matter because we're creating a system here. Just like all the laws of COVID don't always work for every situation. We have to have a system that works for the general cases. So it doesn't really matter. So now, if you're a mukhlat and you're standing at that crossroads where maybe you can go back, you'll go back to the community, but you won't be able to be with your wife, your spouse anymore. So he says, I hold like Rabbi Meir by mukhlat because safta da alma adif. I want to get back to the community. That's what's most important to me. So when I'm a mukhlat, either you're going to tell me, right, I can go back to, I can start my counting days and that'll be good for me. Or I just stay the same, which it doesn't really matter. I'm already like this. But if you tell me I can go to my counting days, that's great, because then I don't have to be outside the 3 machanot anymore. Okay. And that's what's important to me. The fact that now I'm forbidden to my spouse, it doesn't bother me as much. So therefore, I hold like Rabbi Meir. Now, there's one tricky part here. What does Rabbi Meir say? Remember, Rabbi Meir says if it's a bad option, you just be silent. Here, it doesn't really mean Rabbi Meir. What it means is every option is really good for you. Either you're going to continue where you are, which is just status quo, or you can be determined that you're done, right? And that's good. So it's really like saying all options are good for you, basically. And then if you're a musgar, though, if you're you're now waiting to maybe be determined that you're going to become a mukhlat. If safta de alma adif, if your whole concern is I don't want to be ostracized from people, well, then since you're going to be ostracized from people in this situation, if they determine you're a mukhlat, then you definitely don't want to be putting yourself in that situation. That's bad. So then I'm going to hold like Rabbi Yossi. But the other version, the first version that we saw in our Braita, holds it safta de ishto adif. I'd rather be with my spouse. And therefore, right, I'm just like imagining this, guy going around the street, someone interviewing people. What do you think? Would you rather be estranged from people or be estranged from your spouse? It's a very interesting question. So he says the second version, or the first version really, the second one listed here, but the first Braita, where he said, I hold like Rabbi Meir b'muzgal, is because there everything is better. Because even though you're going to be determined, okay, either you can become better, the guy can say, oh, you're not a leper anymore. That's great. Or the person can say, right, the Kohen can say, you're now going to be a mukhlat. Now, if you're a mukhlat, you get to be with your wife. So even though you have to leave the 3 camps, you get to be with your wife. So that's great. So again, or your spouse, right? Either which way, either direction. But when you're a mukhlat, and then you're going to enter into your 7 days of counting. Remember what we said, the 7 days of counting, you no longer have to be estranged from people, but you're not allowed to have relations with one spouse. So if that's the case, then you don't want that to happen. You don't want to be estranged from your spouse. You're good now. You're a mukhlat. So it's true. You can't get out of your leprosy yet. But since you're now going to have to separate from your spouse from having relations, right? Just to be clear, when we mean separate from your spouse, it means you're not allowed to have relations. So that's why it's safta de ishto adif. We're going to hold like Rabbi Yossi, and I'm not going to let the Kohen say anything because you could only get worse. Okay, that's basically this complicated line of where they don't exactly explain. That's the 2 options in the Braita. Now we basically have 2 simple questions to deal with, which is 2 assumptions that came out of what we learned so far. And are they really true? So one assumption we were working on is that a mukhlat is permitted to be with one spouse. So l'meimer de mukhlat mutar b'tashmish hamita. Really? One is allowed to engage in sexual relations with one spouse when you're a mukhlat? The Gemara says, yeah, in fact, it's true. We're going to see 3 opinions, 2 prove yes from a verse, and the third one actually disagrees and thinks you can't be. Tanya, here comes a Braita to prove it. You have to leave. Here it says it. When you're in your counting days, you can look it up in the context there in Vayikra. It says you have to go outside your tent for 7 days. What does it mean to go outside your tent? How do we know that? It says by Matan Torah. It says this is in the description in Sefer Dvarim, but it says lechem or lahem shuva lahem lo alechem. Say to the Jewish people, now you can go back and be with your wives after they receive the Torah. So ohel is relations with your wife. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shivat Yamim Yisperulo, Yemei Sfiro V'Leil Yemei Chaluto. This is a verse from Yechezkel, which is actually not talking about Mitzorah. It's talking about Tumat Meit. Some people have a lot of difficulty. What does this have to do with anything? Some people actually say that it shouldn't say the word Yisperulo. It should say Shivat Yamim, and it was referring to the same verse that the first opinion said, but it learns it from a different way, which is Shivat Yamim, which comes to say just these 7 days. And therefore, Yemei Sfiro, and not the days before, not Yemei Chaluto. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shiva Yemei Sfiro, Kavachomer Yemei Chaluto. He says, no. If in your counting days, when you're already on the way to getting out of leprosy, it's forbidden to have relations, of course, before that, you'll be forbidden to have relations. So he disagrees with the whole thing. But Amar Rabbi Chia, down to the Pnei Rabbi, I spoke before Rabbi, and I said to him, Maditani Rabbeinu, didn't you teach us? I don't know why they have a tradition about this. It's very fascinating. But if you remember, Uziyahu in Sefer Melachim is a king who has leprosy. And his son Yotam now, Yotam lo hayalo Uziyahu ele b'mei chiluto. We're going to say that he was conceived when Uziyahu was in his days of chaluta, of his, right, when he was a Mitzorah Muchlat. And therefore, here you see proof that it's actually permitted to have relations, because here he was born during that time. He was conceived during that time period. Amar lo, afani amar tikain. So Rebbe answers him, yes, you're right, I did say this. Anyway, but my come before. So what's the root of the debate between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks it's forbidden, and the others? So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, savar gali rachmane b'yimei sviro, but koshken b'yimei chaluto. The Torah told us only about yimei sviro, but we can infer from there, obviously, before that, when it should be more strict. Umar savar, the others hold, my de gali gali, my de lo gali lo gali. No, the Torah said forbidden relations with your wife here, but only here. If it would have said it there, it would have meant it there. It would have said it there. The Torah doesn't say it. You can't just derive. And last question for today. And this is the real where we started with this sugya. L'meimer de b'kohen talia milta. Where do we get that it's all up to the Kohen to decide? Like what? You're not a leper if a Kohen doesn't determine you a leper? Yes, in fact, that's true. How do we know this? Vatanya, ubiyom heraotbo, on the day that you show him. What do they learn from here? Yeshom shataroebo, yeshom sheyataroebo. They derive that on the day that you show him means, well, there are some days that you don't show him, that you don't bother going to a Kohen. Mikan amru, and this is what we referred to before. Chatan shenola bonega, if you're a chatan, notnim lo shiva yamei mishet lo ulebeto l'chsuto. You get all the 7 days of the wedding and the 7 days after, for you, for your house, and for your clothes, if any of those became leprous. Same thing on the holiday. So he proves it from this biyom heraot. One of the things they say, when you have leprosy, before the Kohen determines that, let's say your house is a leper's house or you're a leper, you take everything out of the house so that they don't become impure. Now, what does this show you? That even though, let's say it was a leper's house before, and everything theoretically should become impure, it's not until, again, this goes back to the COVID, until it's determined that you're positive, right? We don't start counting anything, nothing really, right? We don't go retroactively. Okay, again, whether that's true with COVID or not, a separate thing. But so therefore, if for something that's just your kelim in your house, we don't want them all to become impure, and we take them all out of the house before the Kohen determines that it's leprous. So all the more so if it's a mitzvah, like a wedding or a holiday. So my benayu, what's the difference between these two? We'll end with this. Amar Abai, mashmut or shenika benayu. It's just a matter of which verse they learned it from. There's no real practical difference. Rava Amar dvar reshunika benayu. According to Rava, though, it would affect whether you can also do this for dvar reshut. Let's say you have a big business meeting and you just don't want to become a leper yet. Can you push it off? Okay, that's dvar reshut. So do we allow that or not? That's a good question. That only Rava will say yes, but Abaye, sorry, not Rava. Rava will say, no, I'm confusing who's who. Rebbe will say yes, and Rabbi Yehuda will say no, because Rabbi Yehuda said, B'yom Hera comes to exclude wedding and holiday, which are mitzvot, but not if it's just because you're not in the mood to become a leper today. So that's a very interesting machloket in and of itself. Stop here for today, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.